Share another portion of God's Word. If you're ever in the Phoenix area, then I encourage you to come visit us at Monte Vista. We would absolutely love to have you. Please come visit in January, though. That's why Phoenicians all leave in June to come to places like here and Yellowstone, to glory in God's creation. When we look around at God's creation, there are many things that we don't necessarily understand. There are things about planet Earth that we will never understand, no matter how much we might dissect them, take them apart, analyze them, and consider them. There are things about the nature of God that we see displayed in His creation that we will also never understand. There are things about the nature of man, why we act a certain way, why we are allowed to do certain things, to treat each other in such a bad way, more often than not, that we will never understand. There are questions about God Himself and His character and why He does certain things as God and why He has revealed Himself in the way that He has in the Bible and throughout human history. And those are things that we will never understand. And we have to be okay with that. We have to accept that there are simply some things in life and about the nature of the divine that are simply too wonderful for me. Please have your Bibles open to the book of Proverbs, and let's notice a couple of verses here. In Proverbs chapter 30, verses 18 and 19. And this is going to be the first passage where we notice this phrase, things that are too wonderful for me. Other passages will show that phrase as well. But for now, notice Proverbs chapter 13, verses 18 through 19. There are three things, says the writer, which are too wonderful for me, for which I do not understand. The way of an eagle in the sky, the way of a serpent on a rock, the way of a ship in the middle of the sea, and the way of a man with a maid. Now, when we look at this, it's interesting to consider that we can understand these things in a scientific way. We can understand them in a technical sense. I can understand the science behind how an eagle floats in the sky. I can understand that. I can observe it flying in the sky. I can make a diagram about it. I can understand to a degree a serpent on a rock and his ways. I can become an expert in all things Ophidian, and I can learn about how it does things, why it does things, how it lives, how it dies, how it breathes, what it eats. I can understand a ship in the middle of the sea. Otherwise, we would have stopped taking ships in the middle of the sea a long time ago. We understand wind and we understand flotation. We understand weight and ratios. We understand that there is a side of engineering that goes into this. And in that sense, yes, we can understand these things. And like all the rest, I do understand in a technical sense the way of a man with a maid. I understand that there are social factors that go into people being attracted to each other, that there are hormones involved in it, age, background, culture. I can understand these things in a scientific, technical way, and yet there are aspects of them that are nevertheless mysterious to us. The thing about it is that if a bird in the sky, an eagle floating in the air, if all it is the science behind it, then why do we always point at the eagle flying in the sky and go, wow? If there really is nothing more to the serpent on the rock than the science behind it and analyzing it and diagramming it and reading about it in a textbook, then why is it when we see a serpent on the rock, the first thing we want to do is get on our cell phone and call somebody and say, guess what I saw out hiking today? We posted on Facebook, look what I found in my backyard today. And we all dislike it and put an ugly face on it in the comments section. If all there is to a ship in the middle of the sea is just the engineering behind it, the design, the science, the wind, then why is it that all of us, like a bunch of nerds, every time we get on a boat, go out in the front of it, just like in Titanic, and go like this? What is it that motivates us to do things like that? Why is it that we close our eyes and feel the breeze on our face and the warmth of the sun? And the same is true of the way of a man with a maiden. Trust me. If it was nothing but social factors and hormones that were involved in two people being attracted to each other, then I guess I don't understand the way of a man with a maiden. Because there sure is a lot more to it than that with me and my wife. There are things that we do not understand, that no matter how much we analyze them, catalog them, categorize them, we will nevertheless be enthralled by them. And I believe the same is true of God. There are things that God has said about himself that we can study in the Bible. There are things in nature, just like Romans chapter 1 says, that we can tell about God based on the observation in creation, and yet there's so much about God that we simply cannot understand. There's so much about God that is simply too wonderful for me, as the writer would say. Go to the book of Ecclesiastes, and notice Ecclesiastes chapter 11 and verse 5. In the Old Testament here, right after the book of Proverbs, in Ecclesiastes 11 and verse 5, notice what it says here about the nature of God and the analogy that he uses. Just as you do not know the path of the wind and how bones are formed in the womb of the pregnant woman, so you do not know the activity of God who makes all things. Very similar to what we said earlier. We can analyze it. We can map and see the course of the wind on planet Earth, and we can understand how to utilize it for our own purposes. And we can also map out how bones are formed in the womb and the various stages in the pregnancy. And yet, what is it about the cells that motivates them to keep growing? What is it that when you bring this piece and that piece together as two independent things, and you bring them together, what is it about that that generates life, that pushes it, forces it forward in spite of all of its obstacles? So it is with the nature of God. We simply do not understand why he works the way that he does in certain ways. And I'll give you some examples. His judgment, his nature, things in the spiritual realm. I would say, and Kyle would probably concur with this, that more often than not, when you put an Ask the Preacher question box out, most of the questions have to do with, tell me about angels. Where did Satan come from? Was Satan a fallen angel? What's going to happen to the angels? What do angels look like? Are there other beings in heaven that we're going to encounter? More often than not, people have questions about the spiritual realm. And Kyle and I, the best that we can do is say, I don't know. I don't have any idea. That's simply something that's too wonderful for me. How about supposed God dilemmas? Questions that you get from atheists or Bible skeptics, people who present you with these supposed dilemmas like, is God so powerful that he can create a mountain too big for him to lift? You know, stuff like that. Always just look for the loose thread in that sweater. Yank on the one loose thread, and usually arguments like that fall apart. Explanations about various actions in the Bible. The Amalekites. All I have to say is the word Amalekites, and all of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Why is it that God would command the Israelites to go and destroy the Amalekites, every man, woman, and child? And yet we sit here and proclaim loudly that God is a God of mercy, and a God of love, and a God who cares about people. We would protest abortion, and yet we would read about God asking for the destruction of every man, woman, and child of the Amalekites. And how do we reconcile that? And yet, even though I believe that I have an answer to that, which is a sermon all in its own, there are still things about some of the decisions that God has made, as revealed in the Word of God, that I simply do not know why he decided to do it that way instead of any other way. Perhaps it boils down to God's sovereignty and the fact that I am a small human being who simply does not understand everything about the divine. Now, when it comes to these kinds of questions, it is okay to ask questions. I think one of the things that happens sometimes, especially with younger Christians, is they're so afraid of asking questions because they fear the response of parents, of elders, of preachers, and teachers. And the moment that you ask a question, somebody's going to look at you kind of sideways and go, he's becoming liberal. He's about to go down a bad path. He's been asking a lot of questions lately. And there's almost like this idea that you're so afraid to just ask the questions because you don't want to get labeled with something, or you don't want people to assume something about you. So sometimes we don't ask the questions at all. Sometimes we go through an entire life of sham Christianity, burying all of these questions that we have, that if we were just honest enough to ask them, and if our peers and our elders and our preachers were honest enough to answer them without making wild assumptions, that maybe we could just get these questions answered and move on. Inquiry is fine. Questions are good. But let's make something clear. That if you're the kind of person who has a lot of questions, if you are skeptical by nature, and some people are skeptical by nature, you must accept that there are limitations to your inquiry as well. And that sometimes, no matter how much it vexes you or bothers you, you are not going to have every question answered. Recall Deuteronomy chapter 29 and verse 29. It's probably one that you're fairly familiar with, but God says here through the prophet Moses, Deuteronomy 29:29, the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our sons forever, that we may observe all the words of this law. Now I want you to log this verse away, because I'm going to refer to it several more times. Even if I don't refer to it by quoting it specifically, you're going to have this concept really, really ingrained in your thinking if you're going to be able to move forward with life and all the questions that you have about God and this creation and nature and man. There are secret things. Things that God has chosen not to reveal to us. There is, and I believe this to be true, this is an opinion, but I believe this to be true. There is more about God that he hasn't revealed than what he has revealed. And the reason why I say that is that if God is indeed omniscient, which is all-knowing, and if he is indeed omnipotent, which is all-powerful, and if he is indeed eternal and omnipresent, which is all places at all times, then quite frankly, I don't think I could comprehend everything there is to know about God. And it is for my own good that God has simply revealed to me a very small part of who he is. The part of him that my human mind can comprehend, because I am not omnipotent, and I am not omniscient, and I am not omnipresent, and I am not eternal. There is more about God that he has not shown about himself than what he has shown. But here's the thing, and I think this should be very encouraging to us. What he has revealed for a reason. And he has revealed for our benefit. Everything that God has said about himself or shown about himself through an action has been for our good and for our encouragement and for our edification and education. I think that's an important point to remember. What has been revealed, says Moses, has been revealed for us. And these things belong to our sons and to us so that we can observe them. More often than not, the questions that we get asked, or the questions that we might even have in our own minds, are things that simply don't have an answer. They simply don't have an answer. And we must be satisfied with the limitations of our inquiry. We can only know as much about a person as he or she will share, and I'll give you a couple of examples that I believe illustrate this. What do you know about the plumber who comes into your house to fix your plumbing? Well, not much, I suppose. You only know about that plumber what he chooses to reveal about himself. Is that not correct? When he walks into your home, you know him simply from the Yellow Pages or from Google, I suppose, or Yelp or something like that. You know, I don't think there are Yellow Pages anymore. You know, I remember back in the day when you had to carry a quarter with you everywhere so you could use a payphone. But that plumber really has not revealed anything about himself except what he chooses to reveal about himself. You don't know if he's married or has kids or has grandkids. You don't know if he went to school somewhere or if he grew up in this place or that place. You don't know if he's a native of Utah or a native of Arizona. You have nothing to understand, nothing to know about him except what he has shown about himself. And for the most part, a plumber will come in and he will show himself to be professional. He'll show himself to be knowledgeable. He'll show himself to be friendly. And I think for most of us, we're satisfied with that. Do you need to know a whole lot more about your plumber to trust the work that he's going to do in your home? What about a police officer? When you are in the need, in the heat of the moment, and a police officer is responding to your call of distress, do you have to know if he was a big fan of BYU or if he was a big fan of Utah? See, that's a local joke right there. Preacher tip, Kyle. Do you have to know what his favorite sports team is in order to receive help from him? Not as far as I can tell. Do you have to know if he's a family man or a lone wolf? Do you even care? When a police officer is responding to your call of distress, honestly, there is very little that you need to know about a police officer to trust him in the work that he's come to do. You pretty much just need to know that he's got his badge on him and his gun is loaded, and you're fine with that. And the same is true of a doctor as well. Do you really have to know a lot about your doctor to trust him? Don't those diplomas on the back of his wall and his good bedside manner give you enough indication? Hasn't precedent shown you that you should trust him when he's prescribed something before and it has worked and it has perhaps saved your life? I can know in all of these cases only what people are willing to reveal about themselves, and for the most part we find that acceptable. So why is it that when we come to God, God seems to be in a category all by himself? We would give that much leeway to other human beings, but when God doesn't reveal things about himself, when there are mysteries about God and his character and his nature, we get so huffy that God would keep secrets from us. And Deuteronomy 29 verse 29 is so bothersome to us. Remember what 1 Corinthians chapter 2 says about how we can know God and what God has shown about himself in the Spirit. He says in 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 11, "For who among men knows the thoughts of a man except the spirit of the man which is in him?" Again, that's what I'm saying, that with a police officer or a doctor or a plumber, you don't know what's in his brain. You don't know what his past is, what his preferences are, but you know what he has told you about himself. And it's true with God as well. Even so, the thoughts of God no one knows except the Spirit of God. And God will only show about himself what he wants to show about himself. A couple of other passages that I believe illustrate this very well. In Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 28. Turn with me here to the prophet Isaiah. And notice here in verse 28, "Do you not know, have you not heard, the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, does not become weary or tired. His understanding is inscrutable." That word simply means unsearchable, unknowable. The same is true in Psalm 145 and verse 3, where the writer says here in Psalm 145 and verse 3, "Great is the Lord and highly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable." I like that verse, by the way. His greatness it isn't just about his character or secrets about him, but it is his greatness itself. I think it's one of the reasons why in the book of Exodus, when Moses asked God to show me thy glory, God just went, I don't know if you really want that, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll hide you in the cleft of the rock, and I'll go past you, and you'll be able to see a glimpse of my glory, the back of my head, so to speak. Because if man sees God's full glory, he would surely die. God's greatness is unsearchable because it's bigger than us, beyond us. Psalm 139. Here's another place, Psalm 139, verses 1 through 6, where we see this phrase, something that is too wonderful for me. Notice beginning in verse 1, and follow along with me here. "O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. Thou dost know when I sit down and when I rise up. Thou dost understand my thought from afar. Thou dost scrutinize my path and my lying down, and art intimately acquainted with all my ways. Even before there was a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, thou dost know it all. Thou hast enclosed me behind and before, and laid thy hand on me." Verse 6. "Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is too high. I cannot attain to it." Now notice what he's saying here. You search me. You know my ways. You know when I get up and when I lie down. You know what I'm thinking before I even think it. You know what I'm going to say before I say it. And that knowledge is too wonderful for me. Knowledge about my own life is even too wonderful for me. What would a book look like if somebody kept an incredibly detailed log of everything you did? How big would that book be after 10 years of life? How about after 20 years of life? How about after 50 years of life? When I talk to my wife sometimes, she remembers things that I did that I don't really think I actually did. She swears I said things that I don't believe I actually ever said. Now, I'm not saying that my wife is wrong. What I'm saying is that we do so much. We eat so much. We look at so much. We watch so much. We say so much. We see so much. We experience so much that in our lifetimes, how much of it do you really retain? And yet God knows everything. Every hair on your head. Every word that you've said. Now, if knowledge about my life is too wonderful for me, then surely knowledge about God is too wonderful for me as well. The temptation, though, when we are left with these questions, is to try to fill in the blanks. When we're not satisfied with the answers that we're getting from the Bible or from an elder or a parent or a preacher, sometimes we will invent things. We will fill in the blanks. It's human nature, isn't it? We will fill in the blanks about God's character simply because we have to have an answer. We have to have reconciliation, don't we? My father is an accountant of sorts in some way or another. I don't actually understand what he does for a living. But I know that in the accounting world, you want to see numbers reconciled. At the bottom of the page, at the bottom of the ledger, you want to see the same number in column A as you do in column B. You want the math to all be correct. That's human nature, isn't it? We want the math to work out. So when the math about God's character doesn't seem to work out for us, we fill in the blanks, which usually leads to mischaracterizations about the nature of God. In the book of Job, for example, there were things about God that Job and his three friends simply didn't understand. And for the sake of time, we don't have the time to look into this specifically, but please write down the scripture references that you see on the screen. In particular, notice in Job 15, in Job chapter 35, and Job chapter 25, the incorrect conclusions that Job's three friends came to. They looked at a problem. They believed something about the character of God, and there was a gap between those things. To them, God is an all-good God. He is a God of justice. Therefore, good things must happen to good people, and bad things must happen to bad people. So Job, he had a lot of bad things happen to you, so you must be a very, very bad person. After all, God couldn't possibly have allowed this much bad stuff to happen to a good person. And yet we know that that's not true. The life of Elijah, the life of Noah, Moses, John the Baptist, Jesus. They filled in the blanks when there was a curiosity about God, a question that couldn't seem to be answered. And when they filled in the blanks, all they did was come to basically Calvinism. It's basically just, especially chapter 25. Read Job chapter 25 sometime and you will see the very first Calvinist in human history. And Job realizes at the end in Job chapter 42, even I got sucked into that thinking. And I was wrong. And I assumed things. In fact, what he says in Job chapter 42, these things were too wonderful for me. There's that phrase again. Things that were too wonderful for me. So I guess the next question that somebody might have is, what about all my questions? What if I, as a truth seeker, as somebody who wants to believe, but I'm in the position of, Lord, help my unbelief, what if I want my questions to be answered? will they ever get answered? Or do I just have to pretend? Do I have to be a sham Christian who just buries all of my doubts? Well, let's think about a few things here. Jesus dealt with some tough questions at all, and I believe that the way that he dealt with some tough questions gives us some insight into how God the Father would deal with some of our questions. Think of it this way. When your questions about God stem from a desire to only confirm what you already think, what would Jesus' response be? In Matthew chapter 19, verses 1 through 4, the Pharisees came to Jesus with a question about divorce. And Jesus' response was, have you not read? Are you just looking for confirmation about something that you already believe? Well, then the problem is, have you not read? Get closer to the Scriptures, and the Scriptures themselves will provide you with plenty of answers. When the question is absurd, Jesus' response might be along the lines of, you're mistaken. And he won't take the bait. You remember in Matthew chapter 22, beginning in verse 23, the Sadducees came up to Jesus with this ridiculous hypothetical situation where, let's just say, Jesus, that if a guy and a girl marry and the guy dies, leaving no offspring, right, according to the Levirate law, the woman has to marry his brother, and let's say his brother dies. And then she marries his other brother, and his other brother dies. And let's say she marries all 7 brothers, and they all die. Well, who's she going to be married to in the resurrection? You know what Jesus' response is? He doesn't take the bait. He doesn't get sucked into the hypothetical, skeptical scenario. All Jesus says is, you're mistaken. You don't understand the Scriptures. When your question is about being unwilling to endure scrutiny yourself, where all you care about is deflecting scrutiny away from you and say, well, what about this? If that's all your questioning is about, then Jesus might respond to your questions with, well, then neither will I tell you. I think that's one of the hard things. If you are a skeptical person by nature, it is very tempting to deflect things onto other people. Instead of looking at your own faith problem, instead of looking at your own problem in your approach to the Bible or Bible study, instead of looking at the ways that you have been a hypocrite in your life, you fall back on the tired old argument of, well, everybody else is being a hypocrite too. Yeah, well, what about this? What about the decisions that our elders made that seem pretty inconsistent? Well, they're being inconsistent also. What about that choice that Kyle and Jessica made? Well, I don't agree with them on that. Well, what about that thing that I read of another preacher? Or what about the way that my parents led that seemed like, well, I didn't understand that. And it is so easy to deflect all that onto other people. And I believe that Jesus' response will be, if you're not willing to answer questions about your own life, then I'm not going to answer your questions about my life. And finally, when the question comes from an ulterior motive, Jesus' response might simply be, why are you testing me? Do you really care about truth? Do you really care to know? I've had Bible studies before on many, many occasions with skeptical people, and I'm always happy to study with anybody. I really am. There is no malice. There's no frustration. I really am happy to study with anybody, even the die-hard skeptic. But one thing that I challenge people on, when they come up with this, okay, well, preacher, tell me about the dinosaurs. What happened to the dinosaurs? Okay, preacher man, tell me how they fit all the animals on the ark. Okay, preacher man, hey, tell me about the Nephilim in the book of Genesis. Whatever happened to all the giants? My response often goes along these lines. Okay, that's a good question. That's valid. And if I answer your question, are you going to become a Christian? If I answer all of your questions about the historicity of Jesus, the validity of the resurrection, the origins of the Bible, the New Testament in particular, if I answer your questions about religious hypocrisy, if I answer your questions about instrumental music, are you going to become a Christian? And I think it's a real tragedy that we can answer question after question after question. And there's always going to be another question. If all you're looking to do is to prove that Christianity is wrong, if all you're looking to do is to escape the notice of God or His justice or His judgment, if all you're looking to do is to point out the flaws and the failures of Christians and the church, there will always be another question. It's a heart problem. It is not a problem of the questions. Because either our questions will have answers and we'll seek to understand them and we'll study them together and come to a conclusion, or they are simply things that are secret and have not been revealed. Either way, it's not a question problem. It is a heart problem. Because for honest hearts who truly love God and seek Him, for honest hearts who actually care to know God as far as He has shown Himself and is willing to reveal Himself, the really essential questions have already been answered for us. In Isaiah chapter 55, notice what the prophet says here. By the Spirit of God, he says in verses 6 through 9, Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts, and let him return to the Lord, and he will have compassion on him. And to God will abundantly pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts. Neither are my ways your ways, declares the Lord. Whereas the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. That's the 2 points we're trying to prove today. God's ways are higher than our ways, and His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And yet, according to verses 6 and 7, He is accessible. Higher than us, yes. Unknowable and unsearchable in so many ways for sure. But is He accessible? Yes. Seek the Lord while He may be found. And all of the most important questions, the questions that lead you to understand what you must do to be saved, what you must do to please God, those questions have already been revealed in full. In Ephesians chapter 3, verses 1 through 10, the Apostle Paul says that the great mystery that was revealed in Jesus Christ. For this reason I, Paul, the prisoner of Christ Jesus, for the sake of you Gentiles, if indeed you'd heard of the stewardship of God's grace which was given to me for you, that by revelation there was made known to me the mystery, as I wrote before in brief. By referring to this, when you read, you can understand my insight into the mystery of Christ, which in other generations was not made known to the sons of men, as it has now been revealed to His holy apostles and prophets in the Spirit. Verse 6, to be specific, but the Gentiles are fellow heirs and fellow members of the body, fellow partakers of the promise in Christ Jesus through the gospel. Now, if that's a message that's appealing to you, then everything you need to do to respond to that message has already been answered for you. There is no mystery about what you must do as a Gentile, as one separated from God because of your sins. There is no question any longer. Only an answer. For he who believes and is baptized shall be saved, but he who does not believe shall be condemned. I hope that this lesson has been very helpful to you. It is hard to go through life with questions, but we must ask the right kinds of questions, and we must ask them with the right heart. If your heart has been pricked by the gospel message, either today or at any point in your study of the Word of God, then this congregation is prepared and is very excited to welcome you into the body of Christ. Everything has been made ready. The only thing that we in the kingdom are waiting for is your response. So whatever needs you might have, why don't you please come forward as we stand and sing.